So hi everyone, officially. My name is Marina Slutsky. I'm super pleased to be with you today. I work on our outreach and project development team at CMHC. And as I think a lot of you will know around the table, CMHC is Canada's national housing agency. And we really work with all levels of government, the public and the nonprofit sector to create safe and accessible and affordable housing for everyone in Canada. I'm, like I said, happy to take questions at the end, but if after the session you feel like you might have some ideas or you want to brainstorm a little bit further, my contact info will be at the end, so don't hesitate to reach out. I think that in the grand scheme of things, you know, I always try to encourage groups to reach out and start planning and chatting with us sooner rather than later. I always like being in the loop of what you're working on, even if you're still sort of early days. I think it kind of helps to have that long-term vision and long-term planning perspective, especially with our eligibility criteria. So you can kind of keep that in mind as you move through the project planning process. I am coming to you from a little ways away today, so I wanted to start off just by noting that I am chatting with you from the unceded Indigenous lands of Tiohtià:ke, which is otherwise known as the island of Montreal, so quite a ways away. In doing the land acknowledgement today, I really want to kind of remind us and sort of anchor our conversation today in our collective responsibility to be informed of the past and ongoing consequences of colonialism, and to learn about the history of these lands and to honor and protect and sustain these lands as well, and see how we can weave that understanding into some of the, potentially some of the projects that we're planning as well. I do want to take a few minutes to kind of talk to you about the foundation of the work that we do at CMHC, which is really the National Housing Strategy. And so wanted to outline kind of the main principles. So as a lot of you will know, the strategy was started in 2017 with funding towards 4 key areas. So that was the creation of new housing supply, the modernization and repair of existing supply, resources for community housing providers, nonprofit housing providers, and innovation and research as well. And when the NHS started, there was really a goal of looking at it beyond, you know, just someone having a roof over their head, really looking at a more wholesome vision. And so that's where we start to talk about people and communities and partnerships. And those, and I'll kind of go through each of those pieces, but those social outcomes are also built into all of our programs as well. And that's how we'll prioritize our applications when they come in for funding. So in terms of people, looking to address the housing needs of everyone in Canada, regardless of citizenship. And we also really do want to highlight the need to create solutions for more marginalized populations, including women and children fleeing family violence, Indigenous communities, folks living with mental health and addiction challenges. So again, that kind of lens and that prioritization is going to be throughout all of our programs. In terms of community, really looking at creating a new generation of housing in Canada, you know, housing that's going to be more inclusive, more sustainable in the long term, more accessible. And again, those are some of the social outcomes that we're going to be prioritizing for as well. And then finally, which I think might be a big conversation for us today, is partnerships. And so the strategy really does encourage partnerships amongst all levels of government, the nonprofit sector, sometimes if we're looking at innovation programs, potentially academia, so all different groups in order to really be able to make a meaningful difference. And again, partnerships is going to be evaluated when we look at projects as well. In terms of a bit of a bird's eye view, I wanted to show you this kind of continuum that we've had here, just to show that there are really there's a range of options depending on the specific needs of the project. So there's going to be opportunities from pre-development to construction to stabilization. All of our programs are stackable as well. I will say that I'm not going to talk about all of this today because I think that'd be a little too much. I will talk about 2 of our programs that I think will likely be the most relevant. However, we really do go on a case-by-case basis, and when we kind of start to dig into your project, we'll be able to figure out sort of what could be the best fit. Again, wanted to do a bit of a bird's eye view of the prioritization criteria as well. I know that I touched base on some of these pieces, but this is it in a general sense. The depth of each of these is going to vary program by program, but essentially this is the main kind of pieces that we look at. So again, the intended residents, we'll look at financial viability of a project, energy efficiency, accessibility, access to transit and services that folks might need. We'll look at the degree of affordability, or like the depth of affordability, I guess I would say, and the duration. And then we have a minimum threshold of 5 units for all of our programs as well. One of the things that I would mention right off the bat, and I'll kind of show you examples of our criteria, is that all the criteria that we have listed are minimums. And so meeting them is going to make you eligible. We're really trying to kind of exceed and go above and beyond is going to make your project more likely to be approved and prioritized for funding, because our funds at the end of the day are competitive funds. However, with that in mind, I would add that a lot of the times when nonprofits or nonprofit organizations apply for our funds, they're already looking at a level of depth of affordability that's going to get them, for example, full points, or they're looking at, serving a specific vulnerable population. So they'll get higher points in all of those pieces, but just something to keep in mind as we go through. So let's just start off by talking about some of the funding opportunities. So the first one is our seed funding program, and it provides a mix of contributions and loans to really assist with the planning costs of building a new project. So really when you're kind of in that stage of conceptualizing what you're going to do, planning, and here the maximum contribution funding is really based on the proponent, and the contribution percentage versus the loan also depends on the type of applicant and the impact of the project on a community. So usually nonprofits would be eligible for a higher contribution than, for example, the private sector. In terms of eligible projects, kind of anything under the sun, mixed use rentals, shelters, transitional housing spaces, supportive housing, Indigenous projects, and renovation of existing units as well. So it's a broad range of eligibility. These are the types or examples of eligible activities. It's not a full list, but just to give you an idea of the types of things that SEED would cover. So things like business plans, site surveys, preliminary designs, development permits, construction cost estimates, all of that kind of work. A lot of the time, folks will use this fund to prepare all of the reports that are needed to apply for our other funds as well. So that's SEED. The next one I will move forward to is our National Housing Co-Investment Fund. We find that this fund is the one that is most often utilized by nonprofit housing providers. And usually, given the nature of the projects that we'll fund through co-investment, or due to the nature of the projects that we'll fund through co-investment, we'll also provide a mix of loans and contributions as well. And here, there's a new construction stream and a repair stream as well. And again, types of projects that are going to be eligible are going to be, sorry, I'm just going to move forward because I feel like, nope, wrong slide. Okay, I'm going to stay on this slide for a minute. So the types of projects, again, is sort of anything under the sun: shelters, transitional housing, supportive housing, mixed use rental, and again, new constructions, conversions, kind of, yeah. So it's really on a basis of let's kind of see what it is that you're hoping to do. I am going to go through the minimum requirements, although I'm realizing that I don't have a slide for it. So I'm just going to talk at you for a minute. So again, minimum requirements, we look at 5 units or beds for the projects always. We do require for the primary use of the space to be residential, although we do allow for some non-residential space. So sometimes that really helps groups to offset the costs of a specific project. So they are able to maybe rent out some commercial space or rent out some office space. And that is often really helpful in making a project more financially viable. So we do allow for a percentage of the space to be non-residential. And then we're going to look at minimum requirements in terms of partnerships, financial viability, affordability, energy efficiency, and accessibility. And so I can tell you a little bit about what that means. So partnerships are a really central focus of the co-investment fund. So our funding has to be supplemented by an investment of some kind from either another level of government, like a municipality or a province, or another investor that comes around the table. The investment doesn't have to be financial, it can be in kind, and there are lots of different types of investments that we'll accept as a partnership. Obviously, a financial investment is going to, again, make your project more viable, but it doesn't have to be a financial investor that comes around the table, but also to say that if you have different partners participating in different ways, that's still meaningful, and will kind of build up your project even more. So in terms of, for example, I have some kind of examples of how a municipality could participate, right? So they could give you a grant for your project, for example, but sometimes that's not always possible. So we see also other ways of participating, like donations of land, potentially a break on municipal taxes, potentially being able to speed up your permit process. All of those things show that there's different groups that are invested in your project, and then the community is really rallying around it. I will say that, I know that there was some questions earlier of like, what is kind of the best way around, what are some things that we're seeing around partnerships? And I will say that the most successful projects that we see in communities that are really able to, are the ones that are really able to kind of have the community wrap around their project with a bunch of different groups in different ways, not necessarily, again, financially, but in different ways to be able to provide support. Now we get to that affordability piece, and I'll send everything out because I can see everyone's like furiously taking notes, but like I'll send everything out so you don't have to worry that you've missed something. But I'll go through the affordability threshold. So the minimum here is that a minimum of 30% of the units have to be below 80% of the median market rental rate. So a minimum of 30% of the units have to be below 80% of the median market rental rate. That has to be committed for a minimum of 20 years. But again, the deeper that you can go on that affordability, the more points your project will receive. And sometimes we will see kind of different depths of affordability in a building. So perhaps some units, will be market, some units will be at 80, some will be at, and then it kind of at a deeper affordability level. And so sometimes that is something that's possible as well. And again, will allow for some more income for your project as well. And again, more viability, but it really, really depends on what you're trying to do. We also have lots of supportive housing providers that build with deep affordability as well. In terms of energy efficiency, we look at a 25% decrease in energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions relative to the most recent building codes. And then for repair, we look at a 25% reduction relative to pre-repair. And for accessibility, a minimum of 20% of the units to meet or exceed accessibility standards. And then access to all the common areas has to be barrier-free. So that's information overload, I know. So I'll send all of this out. What I'll do as well is I'll send out a comparison chart of all of our programs, so you're able to see kind of things side by side and sort of compare and see what we have to offer. So again, for projects, anything, there's lots and lots of eligibility in terms of project types. I did bring some funded project examples, but before we jump into that, when I had chatted with, I think Marcel, he noted that there was a lot of conversation around, partnerships and how to partner together and how to bring groups together. So I did want to kind of bring a bit of information with me around that and how we're seeing different groups structure different partnerships in case it's helpful to you. So I'll go through some of those slides and then I'll show you some funded project examples and then I'll stop talking. So those were the two main programs. Now, again, since there's a group of us around the table today, wanted to highlight some opportunities for partnership and do a bit of an overview of the different structures that we see. Again, both because it's a requirement on our end, but also because, like I said, it really increases the viability of projects. And it's such a great way to kind of leverage all of the different skills and resources in the community as well. So some of this might be super basic, but I just wanted to do an overview. So in terms of the partnerships, kind of the benefits again, or I guess one of the characteristics that we would usually see in a partnership would be like a joint investment of resources, some shared liability or risk taking, and also a sharing of the benefits, or potentially some shared authority and responsibility. It's completely possible to have partnerships be applied at different kind of stages of the life cycle of your project as well. Perhaps you really need some support at the beginning to kind of when you're creating the project, or maybe in that maintenance stage, or maybe at the renewal stage. So it is possible to kind of pick and choose where you might need some additional support, or potentially you bring a bunch of partners together to solve through a specific problem that is coming up. So it doesn't have to be kind of all or nothing. You're able to sort of pick and choose when you can bring folks on board. In terms of one of sort of the reasons that we're seeing that partnerships be more and more important is because sometimes you can tap into some different innovative financing models. You can obviously share resources, bring together lots of different organizations. You can leverage existing equity in land or buildings, which a lot of the time when we're asking groups to come on board with existing equity, that's really hard to do. And so having a partner around the table that is able to kind of, provide some of that or take on that shared both, like I said, risk taking but also benefits. I think that also can be really, really helpful. And then sometimes we see some innovative tenure agreements as well. I will say that, and I don't know where these discussions are with this group, but I will say that, municipalities are also beginning to reemerge as really important players in the housing field as well. They're often in a position to kind of bring folks together because they're sort of in the know of the different conversations that are happening. They obviously have lots of policy mechanisms in-house where they're able to kind of encourage affordable housing. So we always encourage groups to work as closely as possible with their municipalities. In terms of advantages, so again, enabling groups to achieve common goals, you can maximize your limited staff, your limited access to resources, you can leverage investments, facilitate innovative financing mechanisms, you can minimize risks for any one group, you can enhance the credibility of the organizations or the experience. You can really see results for projects that are geared to community needs. So you can kind of tackle a specific community need together, increase fundraising ability, of course, and then obviously providing an opportunity to learn from one another. Like I said before, partnerships don't have to be all or nothing. It can be more short-term, more project-based, or a longer-term collaboration and commitment along sort of the journey of the project, or not the project, of the housing or like the building that you're hoping to bring forward. In terms of potential involvement in decision making, so there's just some examples. Sometimes we'll see advisory groups or stakeholder consultation groups. Again, contributory partnerships is more around leveraging resources and bringing more financial resources on board. Community development partnerships would be more around bringing together lots of different stakeholders to set some objectives and some goals and develop a strategy for getting there all together. So really rallying around a specific need in a community and moving forward together. And then collaborative partnerships are more around active sharing of power and decision making. So you'd kind of all be everyone would sort of be equal around the table and kind of collaborating together towards or within a project. So those were all the different models. These are the different types. Again, contributions, grants, capital, land, buildings, sometimes discounts on specific products, lending, capacity, sharing tools, skills, expertise. And this is again more for municipalities, even though this counts for us as a partnership as well. So any internal policies that are going to enable some greater outcomes for your project. So any, like I said, tax breaks or anything like speeding up permits for affordable housing applications, those types of things. I wanted to be able to present an example of an organization that has found kind of creative ways to operationalize their project through partnerships, in the hopes that, you know, I think ideas are always helpful, and give some options to those of you that are hoping to move forward with something. So I hope that it's useful. So this is a project out of Newfoundland in St. John's. It's the Penney Center of Hope. It's a project with 20 units of permanent supportive housing. They were able to leverage lots of different partners. I've tried to write out some of them, but there were so many more. I thought here that they were able to kind of leverage private funding in a creative way. They were able to get the Penney group of companies, which is a local construction enterprise, to provide 1.6 million just for the naming rights to the building, which I thought was really interesting. They also were able to get some funding from utility companies, manufacturers, labor organizations, Rotary clubs, and all of those groups came together for a little over $250,000 to furnish the units as well. And then they all obviously got federal funding from us. So they received about 1.15 million through the co-investment fund. They worked with the province to get support, staffing for their residential floors. They got a grant from the city and some tax breaks. And then also there's so many services in the building itself, which is great for the residents, but also, like I said, increases the viability of the project because folks are renting out office spaces. So I think there's a food bank in the building. There's like anyone and everyone. I'm just looking at my list, like addictions counseling, social workers, chiropractors, like barbers, like there's and everybody's in the building. So I think that also really helps to kind of envision both, I think, for the services and but also for just for that additional income as well. So I think that's a great example of how different organizations are leveraging various opportunities in creative ways. You know, we've seen other groups run really creative campaigns. There was a group out of Ottawa that asked for donations, I think like $25,000 to sponsor each of the apartments in their building, and actually lots of families, just regular families from the community responded, but also like private organizations and charities. So I think also that piece around having a really tangible ask helped people feel like they were making a really concrete investment. So there's lots of different ways, I think, and to be creative and to do this partnership thing in a different way. So happy to share more information if that's useful. But finally, wanted to bring you some examples of announced projects in Nova Scotia that might be interesting to you as well. So here, this project is owned by the Cape Breton Community Housing Foundation and operated by the Cape Breton Community Housing Association. They received a co-investment fund financial commitment of $858,000 for the conversion of a commercial building into a shelter for folks experiencing homelessness in Sydney. It's a 20-unit emergency shelter. They also received support from the province of Nova Scotia with some operational and some capital funding. They're going to have 8 accessible beds and greenhouse gas reduction of 16%. And then another project out of Dartmouth. So a federal commitment here of more than $2.3 million for the construction of new Bryony House shelter. It's a transitional housing space for women and children survivors of family violence. Again, partners, Housing Nova Scotia, Nova Scotia Advisory Council on the Status of Women, and it says HRM as well. And then the existing space that they had really aged, and so they really needed to kind of move out of that space. So this was the new building that they had created, both for increased safety, but also just more room. And the whole space is built through universal design. So that's everything. The only last piece I guess I would add before I stop for real is that we do generally also have access to a pretty large toolbox here at CMHC. So we have lots of research and data and guides and sort of any like resources that can come up or on issues that can come up during development. So everything from NIMBY to energy efficiency to, you know, we often work with municipalities as well. So if there's something that feels like it keeps coming up or that feels like a barrier, don't hesitate to reach out as well. I'm always happy to share what we've got.
That was excellent. It was certainly informative, and I think it gave certainly me a bit of a better understanding about what sort of partnerships are possible, not just between the organizations and CMHC, but actually between organizations, which is a theme that's kind of been of interest to the groups. As a bit of context, you know, there aren't specific projects that are fully defined. And perhaps if I could just jump in maybe with my own question, it does appear that in terms of the projects that are getting funding or the examples that you proposed, it's, I would say, difficult for me to understand at what point a given community group would get involved, would say, hey, I have an idea, and actually I have a site and I have a number of units that I'm aiming for, and I have these different partnerships. You know, what level of detail is common for community groups reaching out to CMHC and successfully kind of getting funding or engaging with CMHC?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said at the beginning, I personally like to be kind of in the loop sooner rather than later. Sometimes we'll work with groups for years before they even apply for seed. So it's sometimes helpful to know. And if we know different folks working in a similar direction in the community, we can connect groups together and whatnot. However, you're right in saying that in order to actually apply, so for seed funding, you have to have land in place because it's related to like the funding is connected to a plot of land. So that is usually what we ask for, and we ask for some very preliminary financial feasibility. However, I will say that there is a bit of a spectrum of support out there that not a lot of folks know about that I can talk about right now. So always when folks come to me, the first place that I would refer nonprofits specifically would be the Community Housing Transformation Center. Not sure if anyone's heard about them around the table, but they were a resource center that was created out of the National Housing Strategy. And they have funding specifically around strategic planning, working with your board, really trying to get a vision together of where it is that you'd like to go. They have funding around tenant engagement if you wanted to do some consultations around, what it is that folks really need, if you wanted to involve tenants in kind of co-creating a project. So that kind of preliminary planning around your organization and strategically where it is that you'd like to go, or even as a community, right? Like here you are all together. What is it that you'd like to do? How would you like to tackle issues together? There's funding through the CHTC for that. And I'd be happy to share a contact there if that would be helpful. And they do presentations as well, so I'm sure they'd be happy to come in and chat with you guys. And then the last piece that I would say is there's also an early planning grant through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities that is not land specific. That also I would encourage groups to explore as well. They do not fund shelter spaces, but permanent housing they would. So, and honestly, we often work with FCM because our criteria are very aligned with each other. So even as a partner down the road, they might be a really good option as well. So there is a bit of that kind of continuum that even if it's too soon to really connect with us, even though I would love to keep chatting about where you're at, there's CHTC, which I think is always a great first step. And then I always kind of point folks to FCM and then point them. And then we can start working on seed once you actually have land in place.
The non-land dependent was, sorry, I know the acronym. What was the name?
So that's the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, so FCM, and they have an early planning grant that's not dependent on land, because oftentimes you're doing a lot of like preliminary work, but it's still time, right? Like it's time and it's your resources, so it helps to have some funding coming in from that.
Yes. The other question or just follow up is that would be, it would be very much of interest to us if you had a contact over there for us to follow up with, whether that's appropriate in, where we are in this initiative, or if that's something that we'll be looking into more in depth in our funding, political outreach, and community engagement, phase 3. It would be very interesting to have that contact, ready to roll.
Yeah, for sure. I'll share the CHTC and the FCM one for sure. For the strategic planning type of work, a nonprofit does have to take the lead on that. That they only fund nonprofits, so that it would have to be a nonprofit applying. But yeah, I'll share that for sure.
Looking at these projects, some of the preliminary feasibility we've been studying for them is, okay, if we're taking the threshold of affordability as 30% of median total, monthly income, which is a different description than you listed, even still, we're looking at projects that are charging a rent that is still more than many people can afford, and in particular, the membership of some of these community organizations, may be interested in providing. If you're charging, I have the figures here, and actually, Marina, while you were presenting, Linda, I went out and just quickly looked at the median average income so that I could get that 80% for us. And this isn't like a got you, it's just to share that information. So the 30% threshold, 30% of monthly total income that we were talking about for a 1-bedroom in Halifax, basically, is $981 per month. Whereas the threshold of 80% of the median market rate would be about $1,100. So it's close. It's a little higher, would be that 80%. The 2-bedroom, however, that 30% of median monthly income is, as per the study that I'm looking at, is $1,182, so just about $1,200. But at 80% of the median market rate, it would be about $1,500. So it's just looking at the different thresholds and what those would be. If I'm not mistaken, though, Marina, what you were saying is that it's not like you can't charge less than that for your
Oh my
rent.
gosh.
It's just to say that's the, that's kind of the cap. So it's looking at these from, you could go this high and still get that CMHC funding, but if it's within your mandate, I'm speaking to the organizations, to charge less, that's certainly an option. But there's kind of how the numbers break down a bit more.
Yeah, and I guess I would say, like, especially, and you saw, like, from the examples, like the types of projects that we actually end up funding through the co-investment. So I think it would be very hard for someone to come in at that, like, bare minimum and still be able to kind of be able to get enough points to get funded through that. And again, a lot of the nonprofits would never fund that anyway, or would never kind of charge that anyway. So I think, yeah, you're right in saying, like, that's the bare minimum, but we always look for folks to kind of go deeper, and especially just due to the competitive nature of the fund, it's going to happen anyway. But you're right in saying that that is the, like, minimum threshold. So you can have up to 30% of your space be non-residential. So that allows you to do whatever it is that you'd like to do with that space. Like, we've seen folks do community spaces, we've seen folks do commercial spaces. For sure, it helps offset the rent or like the mortgage payments. If you are renting out offices, potentially to other nonprofits, 100%. So that 30% threshold is what we would fund, or that would fall under our eligibility. You could go above that, but we just wouldn't be able to fund that. And then I guess the other piece that I would add, or something that I would maybe recommend, and maybe you've done it already, or maybe there's already folks around the table that are in this situation, is maybe some of the projects that I've highlighted today, or you could look at other projects already funded in the province or in your area, just having a chat with those groups and maybe bringing them in to see how maybe they structured their applications, maybe how they structured their the financing piece, how, especially the ones that align with your depth of affordability, might be some good learning there in terms of how they're able to make it work. And I'm happy to send a list of funded projects as well, if that would be helpful. Or we heard in budget 2021 that we're getting a renewal of our Affordable Housing Innovation Fund. We don't know when that's coming. We don't know, like, it should be coming soon. I don't know when, and I don't know what it's going to look like, but Affordable Housing Innovation Fund looks at those, like, creative and more, like, newer, both financing models, but also models of creating housing.